So, welcome everybody to the third Residence Palace Talks for Journalists. My name is Isabelle Hoberg. I'm the director of the Residence Palace International Press Center. For the journalist who wasn't there during the two first sessions, I will explain a bit where you arrive here. The Talk for Journalists are an initiative of the Residence Palace International Press Center in co-creation with Belgian, European and international journalist associations and federations, the Regional Information Center for Western Europe of the United Nations, the Belgian Federal Institute for Sustainable Development, and in co-creation with journalists. The Talks for Journalists are roundtable discussions for you, journalists and news editors, in the context of the climate emergency and the overstepping of several planetary boundaries. Our intention is to give you more tools to deal with misinformation and greenwashing, as well as with some highly technical issues linked to the climate crisis, which affect all spheres of our society: finance, industry, agriculture, mobility, education, employment, energy, culture, etc. These meetings are created for journalists and are dedicated to you. If you would like certain topics to be discussed or organized with a particular speaker, please let us know. We wanted to give this exchange an intimate character, a conversation between experts and journalists. The experts' introduction will be recorded, but not the discussions that follow. We will leave a maximum of 10 minutes to 15 minutes per speaker as an introduction, and then leave the floor open for discussions. Please feel free to add the speaker's presentation with feedback from your own experience, a situation you may have encountered in your own media, for example. Today we will finish at 10:30. The contact details of the speakers will appear on the screen at the moment, so that you can contact them later if you would need to. Don't forget the breakfast at the backside of the room. And to finish, between partners, we have planned a rotating system of governance, with each partner taking care of organizing a meeting in turn. Today's meeting has been organized by the International Federation of Journalists and the European Federation of Journalists. I thank them for that. I will now give the floor to the moderator, Pamela Morinière, from the International Federation of Journalists. I wish you a rewarding morning.
Thank you, Isabelle. Good morning, everybody. I'm Pamela Morinière. I'm the head of communications at the International Federation of Journalists. I'm very pleased to be here. It's nice to see you all. Today, we wanted to explore a new aspect of climate change. As for those of you who don't know us, we represent journalists' unions and associations across the world. So the issue of workers in general is very core, very close to our heart. And we are very pleased to welcome our three panelists today. Luc Triangle. Luc is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. He's just back from Baku, so will give us also a little bit of insight on what is witnessed over there. We also have Liv Verboven. Is that okay? Yeah. From the International Labour Organization office. She's the director of the office here in Brussels and for all the Benelux. And then we have Julie Bos, who comes from Oxfam. She is the EU Climate Justice Policy Advisor. So our three panelists are going to explore three different aspects of climate: its impact on workers, its impact on humans, its impact on human rights. And we will start with Luc Triangle. So Luc, you're just back from Baku. You had this opportunity to witness the discussions. How did it go, and do you bring us some good news?
Well, let's keep that to the end of my introduction, whether there is good news to come from Baku or not. So, but let me first of all thank you first of all for organizing this event. I think it's important not only this week in the framework of COP29, but more also what's going to happen next year, that we really focus on the climate agenda, because I think personally that the next 12 months will be decisive whether or not we will be able to deliver on the climate needs and on the climate agenda or not. So we are coming really to the moment of decision and deliverables. And if that doesn't happen, then I'm quite pessimistic on whether or not we will ever reach the Paris Agreement targets. Maybe also to complete the introduction that Pamela already made, so International Trade Union Confederation, the global umbrella for all the trade unions in the world, 170 countries, more than 200 million members. Personally, I'm in charge of this organization nearly 2 years. Maybe interesting to say also that before that I was in charge of Industry All Europe as General Secretary. And in that sense, I was strongly involved in the whole implementation and decision of the Green Deal, the Fit for 55 package, and all the policy measures that were aligned with that decision in the EU. And I'll come back to that period as well, because it's strongly linked also to the just transition deliverables or not. First of all, in a global context, let's be clear. Those countries that suffer most of the climate change are the ones that are the least responsible for the fact that we are today in this trouble. Let's make that point very clear. The lower income regions, and I'm sorry that I now look to the paper because it's about the numbers, lower income regions, home to nearly 3.5 billion people, they face the disproportionate impacts. In sectors such as agriculture and construction, heat stress alone resulted in 490 billion lost working hours in 2022. And the risk to reduce the GDP globally with $2.4 trillion by 2030. This is about economics, but actually the impact on lives, on people, on communities, on regions is for us the most important part of the whole debate. And so in that sense, we have to talk about climate justice. What we want is climate justice in this whole debate. We ask climate action, we strongly support the Paris Agreement and the targets, but at the same time we also ask climate justice. And what does it mean for a trade union? That is that we are not only, and that makes us different with environmental groups, not only ask the targets on climate action, but also link it to just transition. Just transition is the concept that is accepted in the 2015 Paris Agreement, and it's linked there, but it's also reconfirmed last year in COP28 in the Just Transition Work Programme, where it is really now also part of policy making and ambitions that the countries need to deliver on the concept of just transition. What does just transition mean? For us, just transition means that Europe, but the world needs to deliver on the slogans. No one should be left behind, no region should be left behind. These are the slogans. When I was together with Ursula von der Leyen in 2019 as Industrial Trade Union, with Frans Timmermans in Silesia, discussing with the mine workers, we asked to deliver on your slogan, because this was the way how it has been sold in 2019 also here in the EU. The Green Deal has to be first and foremost a social deal. Well, yeah, we can't agree more, but deliver on the social dimension, because this will be crucial. If we don't deliver on the social dimension, then we will lose the support of public opinion, because if people feel that they are indeed left behind, that they are paying an impact and a price for this climate action, they will turn their back to parties that are questioning the whole climate agenda, not only in the EU, but also outside the EU. Look to what's happening in the US. So in that sense, we need to deliver. If not, we will not be able to continue with our climate agenda, because we will lose ground of public support in this whole climate agenda. So just transition for us means, first of all, social dialogue. We need to be at the table. On Monday, we launched, together with the International Organization of Employers in Dubai, a joint statement on the joint opinion that social dialogue is absolutely crucial in this whole process. You need to bring employers and workers not only at the end of the process at the table, but from the very first moment onwards. You need to bring them at the table. Social dialogue. Secondly, also important, but not only, a skills agenda. Skills, retraining, upskilling. So we need to deliver on the skills, because the workers today in certain sectors, extractive industries, fossil fuel-driven, energy-intensive industries, they will need new jobs, because these industries will phase out. So we need to do today the skilling to have the workers ready for the jobs of tomorrow. We don't see that enough today. Yeah? Thirdly, also the whole concept of social protection. Not everybody will be able to be taken on board, but social protection is an important and crucial part of the whole just transition. Lieve will certainly also elaborate more on that dimension as well. And then also re-industrialization or new jobs, new quality jobs in the regions that are heavily affected. And we have some examples. In Spain, for instance, the whole just transition has led to a new future for regions that were mainly in mining or in energy-intensive industries, such as steel. In the north of Spain, Galicia, Asturias, we see there indeed also new jobs popping up. But we don't see that in most other cases. So just transition is for us an important part. But that means that if now go back to the global context, and now I make the link to Baku. This Baku summit, and I was there until Tuesday, is about financing. Is to deliver on the need for financing. And why is this necessary? It's necessary because without financing, this whole climate agenda will just create more inequality in the world. And Julie will certainly also elaborate further on that. Why? Because some countries and some regions, for instance, the north of Europe, will have the resources to do this transition, to attract the new jobs, and to indeed attract also the new sectors. But many other regions in the world, they will just be faced with the effects of climate change and don't have the means to do the necessary investments in the transition and also deliver on the just transition for the population and for the workers. So without adequate global financing, this climate agenda will create more inequality. That's for me an absolute certainty. And what are we talking about? We are not talking anymore about billions. Today, the debate in Baku is how many billions will we generate together. The London School of Economics, $6.5 trillion US. So 100 billion, 6.5 trillion is what we really need at global level for the financing. And we are not going to get that in Baku. And that's our concern, that if we don't have this financing, then it doesn't look good for next year for COP30, where we need to take further action than in Belém under the Brazilian chairmanship. And the financing needs to be quality finance as well. Because finance and finance is two. That means it can be cash, but it can also be that countries go to developing countries and say, okay, we take over 20% of your forest to offset our CO2 emissions. Well, that's not quality finance. We support you financially for that. So that kind of deals the world doesn't need. So in that sense, to conclude, the climate financing is important, but it's also, for us, climate financing is also development financing. And in that sense, this $6.5 trillion US is also an engine for developing countries which are most in need to have a development agenda. Here I make the link to the UN agenda on sustainable development goals. We are far off track in the delivery on the sustainable development goals. Well, this climate agenda and this climate financing can also be an engine to deliver on the SDGs all over the world. Last sentence, why are the next 12 months so important? Because we are having a number of tops and summits that are really crucial. First of all, next year at the end of June and the beginning of July, we have the Financing for Development agenda in Sevilla, in Spain. Global. And that's indeed delivering on the development agenda. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are nice and they are good, but we see that many countries don't have the means to deliver on these Sustainable Development Goals. And the climate agenda is part of it. The climate change agenda is part of it, and the climate financing is part of that. So for us, this summit next year is really about delivering on the promises that the developed countries, which are actually rich enough to finance the support in developing countries. So this summit is for us a crucial moment where we can see whether or not we are all serious in the North about supporting the South in their developing agenda and climate agenda. A second important summit next year is a World Social Summit in November that unfortunately takes place in Qatar. Not a credible place to have a social summit, if you ask my opinion, and I delivered that message also to the Secretary General of the United Nations and to the Director General of the ILO. And that will also be followed by the COP30 then next year in Belém, in Brazil. So for us, these 12 months here are the months of deliverables. And if we don't deliver, as I said before, it doesn't look good neither for the climate agenda, but also not for the development agenda. So the sentiment in Baku was, until Tuesday, not positive. Because this summit and this COP is about financing. And what I picked up, and we are actually only in the corridors because we are not negotiating, we are not a government, but what we picked up was that actually until Monday, Tuesday, no progress was made. And we are this weekend finishing the COP29. And as I told you, it's not about 100 billion US dollar, it's about much more that needs to be generated to deliver on the climate action all over the planet. So let's see what's coming up now by the weekend on the outcomes of the COP29. And let's hope indeed, let's try to be optimistic that indeed the urgency is accepted, the urgency is seen, and we are also delivering as Global North on our financial commitments to the Global South. Very last sentence, do we have the money? Sure we have the money. We are going to conduct, together with Oxfam next year, a joint campaign on Tax the Rich. 2,781 individuals in this world own altogether 14.2 trillion US dollar. Okay? Okay, they employ people, they pay a little taxes, but not much. So there is money available. It's a matter of political choice. Do we take the political choice, or do we continue with dividing the world more and creating more and more inequality? So it's a fundamental political choice on what kind of world do we want. So in that sense, everything is connected. The World Social Summit, the development agenda, the climate agenda, it's all interconnected, interlinked.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luc, for drawing us a grim picture in a way, but also giving us a lot of insight, I think, for further discussions, and you'll have the opportunity to ask Luc further questions. The ITUC has been very active on this issue of climate for many years, and so is ILO. Liv, you're going to explain to us also what, in your perspective, a just transition means. You've been working hand in hand with ITUC for many years. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm Lieve Verbove. Good morning to you all, and I look forward to this conversation because I'm going to present a few things. First, some key figures, and then also what just transition, how we can deliver on it. And this is based on within the ILO, where we have an agreement between workers' representatives, employers' organization representatives, and governments. So the ILO, just to give you some explanation of what the agency stands for, it's the oldest UN agency and is specialized on the matters of the world of work. It's a tripartite organization, so which means that workers and employers are at the same level, giving their input with governments and make agreements that then form a normative framework, conventions, recommendations, or take the form of guidelines. The conventions are conventions on labor rights, so they are meant to create a level playing field in the world. and the conventions are open for ratification. So I close its parenthesis and go now forward with my introduction. Some key figures on why climate emergency, climate change, climate crisis directly impacts the world of work. It's you, it's the workers maybe you know that bring food to the table, etc. So I wanted the 4 sectors in the economy that are most dependent on a healthy biosphere, a stable climate are farming, fishing, forestry and tourism. And these sectors together, they represent 1.2 billion workers. Just to say, if we don't do anything, that's a lot of people. The second figure I want to give is about heat stress, global warming, rising temperatures. You experience it when you have to choose your holiday destination, but workers experience it when they are working on the fields or when they're working in a confined place. So this heat stress, what does it mean? We've done studies about it, and we see that 70% of the global workforce is affected by it. And heat stress, we consider it a silent and invisible killer. It's killing people. It's killing workers on the job. But more than that, it also creates injuries. It creates illness, heart strokes, sudden death, etc. And also, if you look at it from a more economical perspective, it's a productivity loss of 2% on the national GDP. That's what we have calculated. 2% around the world. The cost of injuries, I have to correct myself, is 2% around the world is cost of injuries, which can reach around 1.5% of national GDP. Now, all these numbers, they paint, let's say, a picture where we say there is an impact on the world of work. There is an impact, and we have to deal with it. But the good side of this coin is that there can also something can be done about it, and what workers, employers, and governments of the 187 member states of the ILO have agreed to is policy guidelines on just transition. With the right investments, with promoting a circular, green, low-carbon economy, jobs can be created. Sure, there will be jobs phasing out, especially if you look at fuel fossil industry, but we've calculated and estimated that 100 million jobs can be created with the right investments. So there can be a good story about this, if there is a willingness. The 3 elements in the ILO guidelines on just transitions and other resolutions that have been adopted within the ILO are, and I'm going to compliment Luc on this, first of all, social dialogue. And what does that mean, social dialogue on just transition? It means, for example, that the nationally determined contributions that are being discussed, that they involve the social partners. It's not done enough so far. And that's why also this just transition dimension is lacking. We've looked at all the previous rounds of the NDCs, and only 1 in 10 countries has involved social partners. So there is a huge potential there to make the next round of NDCs involve the social partners and have a better attention to just transition policies. As ILO, and representing here the consensus of these 3 entities, we've also looked at other layers of social dialogue. And in countries, collective labor agreements that are being concluded between the social partners, we've seen that only 23% of the collective labor agreements deal with questions relating to climate change or occupational health and safety, like heat stress, how to deal with it, how to mitigate it, how to protect workers. So also there, it's a lot of potential. So the case for social dialogue on climate matters is important. And the second one that Luc also mentioned was skills development. So that's really important to prepare the workers for the transitions, and not just tomorrow, but also today. The workers of tomorrow, that's the youth, so you look at the whole area of skills development from TVET, so in the schools already now, what are the green skills? And for those workers that are working in industries that are being phased out so they can transition into other jobs. And the third element is on social protection. Because there will be people impacted, they can suddenly, if without any social protection, they will get deeper and deeper into problems and poverty and more difficult to get out of it. So you need that social protection system that is robust, that is universal. And it's not just a luxury. It is often, we take it maybe for granted here in Europe, because there is a rather advanced social protection, but compared to the world, what you see in the world is only 52% of the world population is covered by at least one branch of social protection. So there is a lot to do there, and it can be done. And we've seen that already by the climate crisis. A few countries are taking steps to take it into account. Algeria, for example, it's just giving a good practice. We can give more if during the Q&A. But like Algeria, what they've done, if workers are losing a workday because of heat, then they can get some compensation. So at least they don't lose all the income for those days. In Brazil, they also, with the recent floods, they provided vital support to those who were affected. So that social protection system really makes sense. So those are the things that my colleagues in the COP29 are advocating for. We even have a Just Transition Pavilion there. I guess you've been there, Luc. It's co-funded by the EU, and we are convening workers, employers, and governments from different countries, but also civil society organizations, to really emphasize this need for a just transition based on those policy guidelines. And there is a lot of work to do, but it is possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you very much. Also, because for clarifying also some of the concepts that we are talking about today, very complimentary of what Luc said as well. Now we're turning to Julie Boss. Julie, she works for Oxfam, and she's going to introduce us to the impact of climate, the link between climate and inequalities, and also tackle this controversial issue of biofuels.
Yeah, thank you, Pamela, and thank you for inviting me. It's really nice, I think, to talk to a group of journalists. My colleague Jade often does a great effort to get our work under the attention of journalists, so it's nice to have you all in the room here. At Oxfam, we work to tackle inequalities that keep people poor. And I specifically work in the EU office, so we work on European level on evidence-based advocacy work from different angles to work towards this goal. You might know the saying that if you teach a man or a woman to fish, they can feed themselves for life. But what if the rivers dry up because of climate change and they're not able to fish? Or what if a conflict prevents them from fishing safely? Or if, in the case that the waters are polluted because businesses put their poison in there. That is why Oxfam tries to work on the root causes of poverty. And I think it's really important to stress that inequality and climate are twin crisis. We already heard from Lieve and Luc that the rich countries, people and businesses are most responsible for the climate crisis, while the people least responsible will bear the biggest impacts. During the last COP, Oxfam presented a new report in which we explain the interconnections between inequality and climate. And for example, on European level, if you take the carbon emissions of the use of super yachts and private jets from one billionaire, and the study looked at a sample of the 50 richest billionaires in Europe, and if everyone would have these emissions, it would take us 2 days to finish the carbon budget that's left. On a global level, we see that the wealthiest 10% emit as much as the poorest 50%. So that gives an impression on how unequal the impacts and the causes of climate change are. And the least responsible are bearing these impacts. Oxfam, for example, in 2022 published a report that showed that extreme weather events caused by climate change doubled the people who are facing hunger since the 2000s. So in this twin crisis, it's the richest that need to foot the bill to solve the climate crisis and the inequality crisis. And an example how the EU can do that is through a wealth tax. A potential wealth tax could generate $287 billion that could be used to tackle climate change and the inequality crisis. But despite these impacts, the EU is doubling down on policies that worsen climate and inequality. And we are also now seeing with the new European Commission, there's a risk of backtracking of key legislation that needs to protect the climate. For example, we have the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive and the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive that are at risk of being simplified under the banner of cutting red tape, of having a simplification agenda. So I'm going to give 3 examples of policies in the EU that have this impact and need to be improved. So the first one is the European biofuel policies, and this is the specific topic I've been working on in the last couple of years. But we have seen that the EU since 2003 is the motor behind creating a new biofuel industry as under the banner of a solution for climate change. But it turns out that biofuels are a false solution for climate. This is because they do not deliver the promised greenhouse gas reductions. And we've seen that if you take into account indirect land use changes, which are not in the accounting rules of the EU, and these emissions are emissions from food productions that are pushed away to carbon-rich areas such as forests or carbon-rich soils. If these are taken into account, some biofuels even emit more greenhouse gases than the fossil fuels they replace. And on top of that, we've seen that the biofuel industry worsens food insecurity and impacts human rights throughout their supply chain. If we, for example, take the amount of land that's used for crops for biofuels to simply produce food, we could feed 120 million people daily. So the EU needs to stop using food for fuel, and they currently already revised their new biofuels rules last year. They haven't used this opportunity to improve their rules, but now there's a moment for the European countries to implement these rules in a better place in the implementation of the EU rules. The second example I want to dive into is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. This mechanism is put in place to avoid carbon leakage, which is the risk of industries moving their business to and their pollutions to countries with lax environmental rules. And to avoid that, the EU is going to put in place tariffs so that these companies cannot move without consequences to these other countries. But as a consequence, the EU is passing the financial burden to these poorer countries through these tariffs, and they are affecting, again, the least responsible people. Because they haven't decided to use the revenues of the carbon border adjustment to support these countries, to use them as climate finance, and that should be the case. They should restructure the carbon border adjustment to make it fair and to channel these funds towards climate action and inequality reduction. And the last example is the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, which was recently decided on. This legislation has the potential to transform businesses, to make them responsible for the human rights violations in their supply chain, and for businesses to put in place climate transition plans. But during the negotiations, this legislation was watered down severely, but still in its current form, it's crucial to implement this legislation to protect people and the planet. But again, under the new European Commission, there's a risk of deregulating this legislation, because under the banner of red tape, they want to simplify much of the legislation that's impacting big business. One example that I don't have time to go into, but which I want to mention because colleagues of mine are working on it, is the Global Gateway. And under the Global Gateway, the EU wants to use its aid budget in a more efficient way, but a recent study from Oxfam showed there's a big risk that the aid budget moves to big businesses. And in that way, the Global Gateway will fail to protect, to fight poverty and to protect the planet. So to conclude, climate change, sustainable development and inequalities go hand in hand, and they should also be tackled hand in hand. Current EU climate policies are deepening the inequality crisis and are protecting more the businesses than people and planets. There are some solutions the EU could look like. For example, the wealth taxations and stronger corporate accountability can help fund climate change across the world and hold companies to account. So I think for you as journalists, there's an important role in getting to protect climate and inequalities. I think on an EU level, you have an important watchdog role to look into EU policies, scrutinize their actions, and hold the policymakers to account. And I think it's key to include stories that we do not see often in the media. And these are the stories of people impacted most. So that's it from my side.
Thanks very much, Julie. Actually, I was going to ask you a question about this, because it's true that we need to change the narrative, and that's why we have these talks as well, to change the narrative, to see how we can talk about climate differently. I wanted to ask each of you, what kind of stories would you like to see more in the news? And could you give an example, a concrete example of maybe a story that you've heard of, a good practice, a positive story of a worker, a human being that has managed to either is suffering from the situation, but has managed maybe through your organization to achieve something, or give us an example of what is missing.
I start? Yes. Okay. No, I think for me the point that needs to be highlighted today in the global context of the whole debate on climate action is that if we don't take the whole world on board in this agenda of climate action, and if we don't give the necessary financial means from those that have to those that need, so from mainly the global north to the global south, if we don't deliver on the promises already made, by the way, it's not new, it's promises that have already been made but not yet materialized, then this whole climate agenda will first of all not solve the climate targets, because many have not the resources to make the transition, to phase out of mining, to phase out of fossil fuel driven industries, and especially energy intensive industries. So we will not deliver on the targets, and it will create just more inequality, more tension, and more geopolitical conflicts. Because, as I said in my first introduction, everything is connected here. That's for me a key message. And that's why it's in the interest also of the Global North to show the financial solidarity with the Global South, and to make sure and ensure that on the middle long term, everybody can take the necessary climate action, and everybody can also create the just transition. Because, as I also said in my introduction, if we leave people behind, and if we leave communities behind, and if we leave regions behind, then they will turn their back and they will not support anymore the climate agenda. Although they are suffering maybe from the climate agenda, but they lose their jobs, there is no future anymore for their communities, and they will fight for what they have today, because that's the only certainty that they have, is what they have today. If nothing is given for them for the future, well, then they will indeed not continue to support, and that's for me the key challenge today, and that's also what we do as ITUC and as a trade union movement at global level, is to make that message clear. And I was, as I said before, involved in the whole launch of the Green Deal, but now also at global level with the COPs and so on. I hear the macroeconomic numbers, the hundreds of millions of new jobs that will be created. And I hear Frans Timmermans and Ursula von der Leyen still saying in 2019, 2020 that the net result of this transition will be more jobs than what we have today. Well, I'm not questioning those numbers, because I don't have the evidence and I don't have the statistics, but what counts for me is not the macro number, but the micro solution for every individual worker and every individual community and region. And we don't see that connection. So I don't question the macro numbers, but I want to see the micro at local level, the solutions. And so to last question or last point on what do we do as trade unions and what can we see? Well, we assist. We have a Just Transition Center as ITUC. It's a special unit in our ITUC that just won a Swedish prize for sustainability for the work we do. So this Just Transition Center assists unions worldwide with programs and with negotiations with governments in the local context as well on how to deliver on just transition. And I think that's what we need to do. That's what we need to continue to do as the International Trade Union movement. And you mentioned, I think, the example of Algeria. I can mention in the same continent Nigeria. I can mention the Brazilian NDC, I think, or Just Transition Plan that just has been launched last week. Interesting to read, because a lot of good points are there taken up of what we ask. I refer to Spain. Even in a country in deep crisis, also war, like Somalia, it's the first country in the world in the legal context that has put the just transition in legislation, that it's a requirement, it's a must. So that's all the result of the work we do with our affiliates to get it done. But we are not yet at a point where we can be satisfied. And where it's on the good track, no, because it's still in too many countries not happening. Lieve referred to the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and the 2025 review. So we hope now, also with the decision of COP28 of last year on the Just Transition Work Programme and with the ILO guidelines on just transition, that we can indeed bring social dialogue and just transition with all its dimensions. I mentioned it, you mentioned it, Lieve, can bring it more into the reality of country plans and so on. It must go beyond theory. It must go beyond slogans.
Thanks, Luc. Liv, do you have a concrete example of what has been achieved by the ILO? What can we talk about in our stories?
Yeah, there are a number of projects that we deliver on, and I picked one that I feel, passionate about, because I also lived in Senegal for the ILO 8 years, and I know this region well. It's the Sine Saloum. It's where you have the mangroves grow, and it's a very delicate ecosystem. And for example, in Senegal, with funding from GIZ, a German funding, the ILO has implemented a project with 2,000 women and youth in the region to look after the mangrove, to rebuild it, regrow it, and the whole value chain that goes along with it. So it's impact for these 2,000 people. But equally, we have examples in Latin America or Asia, in the Philippines, where we assisted, but that's very different. A green jobs strategy, so that the country can integrate in its TVET program the concrete skills that are needed. Or Namibia, where we also deliver on a program of green skills, preparing people to work in the hydrogen projects. And there's huge ones that are going to be put in place by the Global Gateway, by the way. But yeah, very different examples. But I think one other example would be where a collective labor agreement at enterprise level has made the working conditions better for the worker. Just to have the protection against heat, just to give the empowerment to those workers to negotiate with the management the breaks. When to plan it, when there is a summer or an increased temperature, that through that dialogue it can happen. Such a collective labor agreement at enterprise level would also make the change. And we have been supporting our constituents to do so. So a few examples, and more if you want. We have also voices from our beneficiaries, and those come with images, with interviews that you could use if you would like to. But contact us and Fleur, who is with me after the talk, to do so. Yeah.
Thanks. How about you, Julie?
Yeah, I think at Oxfam we try to get the stories of people who are impacted by climate crisis. We try to gather those stories and present them to the world. And I think one example in my work is a recent study done by Oxfam Belgium in the sugarcane supply chain. Sugarcane is used for biofuels, and the sugarcane is largely imported from Brazil and Peru, and they have looked into these supply chains to see if how this is produced and if the human rights are protected, and they were not protected. They have worked with partner organizations and journalists on the ground to gather the stories from workers in the supply chain, and they have seen work rights violations. We have seen many gendered impacts, where, for example, women are hit harder by food insecurity that's caused by biofuels because they have the largest responsibility to get food on the table in a family, but also directly in the women workers' rights for getting breaks in this supply chain. So I think it's very important to understand how these European climate policies, or European policies in general, have an impact on global level and on local communities. And we've seen that if the sustainability criteria in place are not strong enough, which is definitely the case for biofuel policies, European policies cause human rights violations. And these are stories we need to get out there.
Thanks very much.